Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello students, today we will look at a presentation on places to gather, that is museums and art galleries, etc. We have already been through places to move, railway stations and airports, places to work, office buildings, places to live, houses, residential buildings, and now we look at places to gather. As in all those other building typologies, we saw the tremendous change taking place in them and how in the 21st century they have dramatically evolved. Airports have become airport cities, railway stations have become multimodal hubs, the tremendous change that has come in office buildings, particularly the contribution of high-tech architects, and how places to live have evolved. Houses have evolved over time. We saw the changes taking place from the fundamental modernist factors, ideologies in the early 20th century till what has happened today. Today we look at what is happening to museums and art galleries and gathering places. From temples of art, they are becoming open forum. Earlier museums and galleries were formal exclusive temples of culture. But today they are open, inclusive and multi-use spaces for people, ideas and interaction. So one thing that we are repeatedly seeing in 21st century buildings, whatever be the typology, is there is more flexibility, there is more the concept of multi-use spaces coming in, and how buildings are becoming more open and more fluid. Architecture is becoming an experience in these museums and art galleries. Buildings are not just containers for art, but they are an immersive experience blending art, technology and public life. They are cultural anchors in cities. Museums and galleries serve as urban landmarks. They are catalysts for regeneration. The classic example of the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao and the term the Bilbao effect. Here in this slide, for example, you are seeing the Louvre in Abu Dhabi by Jean Nouvel. In the earlier slide was the Maxim Museum in Rome by Zaha Hadid. All these buildings are completely very different from what museums and art galleries used to be. So if we look at the key features of these gathering spaces, the new role they are playing in the 21st century, one is they are very flexible and adaptable. Spaces for exhibitions, performances and community use. There is a lot of transparency and openness. Now these are some of the factors we are repeatedly seeing. Some of these factors we even mentioned when I was talking about airports. There is a lot of transparency and openness. So here also that transparency and openness with glass facades, atriums and a blurring between the inside and outside boundary. There is a technology integration with digital galleries, interactive exhibits, AI assisted curation. There is a extension of the public realm. The plazas, courtyards, lobbies are all designed as civic spaces. There is also the aspect of sustainability and a climate response using daylight, natural ventilation and working towards a low carbon design. So if we look at some of the buildings to see how the evolution has taken place, looking back to the 1970s, 1972 we saw the Centre Pompidou, what a radical building it was, high tech, inside out, a cultural machine with an open plaza. 1997 Guggenheim Museum, another revolutionary building in deconstructivism with the sculptural titanium form, a symbol of a transformation of a city of Bilbao. 2000 Tate Modern London, adaptive reuse and industrial heritage turned into a global art hub. 2010 came the Maxim Museum in Rome by Zaha Hadid. Fluid geometries, dynamic circulation paths started appearing. 2017 Louvre Abu Dhabi by Jean Nouvel, a climate responsive building, universal museum for a global audience. Then 2021 the M Plus Museum in Hong Kong by Herzog and de Meuron, Asian visual culture, mega urban scale and integration with the city fabric. Another thing that you see is that these buildings are not confined to one continent or a few countries. as time has passed by, more and more countries are becoming participants. These buildings are spreading all over the globe. So for example, here from Paris and from Bilbao in Spain, moving from London to Rome, then onwards to Abu Dhabi and to Hong Kong, so spreading also towards Asia. So it's increasingly common for 21st century architects to reject traditional or conventional architectural types. We have seen this repeatedly over these lectures. There is a challenge for us to discover new meanings of beauty and to value the way in which new technology creates these non-traditional, non-established forms. Architects are beginning to ask why new technology should be inserted in historical architectural boxes or containers, and why should there be a historical recall, why should we go back towards historical forms. New technical ideas question our very perception of what we consider aesthetics to be in buildings, and we are rethinking architectural fundamentals today. So for example, here we have the Heather ADF Center and the Walt Disney Concert Hall by Frank Gehry, two buildings that completely highlight these points of this slide. But let's go back a little bit to one early building that brought about remarkable change in the way we look at these gathering spaces. The new National Gallery in Germany in Berlin by Mies van der Rohe in 1968. Works of Mies van der Rohe are foundational for large column-free spaces, resulting in global architectural trends. He was the pioneer of both the long span and the tall span, the tall skyscraper. I have discussed this earlier when I was talking about Mies van der Rohe. Now, this museum, New National Gallery, is a glass box over a concrete box. This glass box over a concrete box. If you recall, we had looked at a house like this. That was the Blas house by Alberto Kemper Beza, having a very similar building form with a glass box over a solid box, and I had then also compared this building with that. The actual display area in this museum is in the lower level. So there is a factory aesthetic about it. We had talked about it when I was talking about the high-tech building, the introduction to high-tech buildings. In that series I talked about this factory aesthetic, that they had learned from large factories, column-free spaces, and brought them into building design. So this industrial design has been elevated to monumental architecture. This is about a 65-meter long building with only 2 steel columns on each side. There are free corners, and the building has got a very lightweight appearance. So we come to the concept we talked about earlier also, the column-free universal space that Mies brought into architecture, and these are the plans of the new National Gallery, section and elevation, how the building was conceived. So when we look at the upper hall, it's a glass enclosed pavilion with this flat steel roof that just seems to float, supported by these 8 cruciform columns in the form of a cross, 2 on each side, and this complete column-free open space inside with these very large roof overhangs. So 3 places where art can be displayed: outside the glass and steel pavilion, within the glass and steel pavilion, or underneath the pavilion in the concrete level or the concrete box. Now there is a problem with the upper hall. It's very hard to use it for exhibitions because there is excessive daylight coming in that can damage and disturb the artworks. Also it's very difficult in climate control to control the temperature and humidity, and because of the open plan there are very few walls to display paintings, etc. Therefore this is a drawback, but the building itself is the artwork. It highlights Mies's architectural vision about the universal floor or the universal space, which then became so widely used in architecture. So the lower level, which is partially below ground, contains the permanent collection, visitors, facilities, etc. The design has lot of clarity, there is minimal structure, lot of openness, and interior exterior boundaries are blurred, as I told you a little bit earlier. This is what slowly started happening in museums and art galleries. So this is the lower level, and you can see this is also a very expansive space with few columns, and this is how the exhibition is held both in the lower level and in the upper level. These are some of the other images of the new National Gallery. Let us now come to the one person who has made a very big difference to the modern places to gather, and that is Santiago Calatrava. He was born in Valencia, Spain, 1951, studied architecture in Spain, post-graduation he did in urbanism, then he studied civil engineering in ETH Zurich. In 1979 he completed it, then he went on to do a doctorate in technical science in the Department of Architecture in ETH Zurich, a dissertation of foldability of space frames. That shows his very early interest in making these amazing buildings that fall under the category of sculptural expressionism. These are some of the works of Santiago Calatrava. The Liège-Guillemins railway station in Belgium, Museum of Tomorrow in Brazil, the World Trade Center Transportation Hub in New York, and the Milwaukee Art Museum that we will be looking at now in 2001 in the USA. Calatrava has also become famous for his bridges in different parts of the world. Like for example this one, the Alamillo Bridge in Spain, is a single pylon cable stayed design. The form and expression is half bridge, half monument, and it falls under structural expressionism, how the structure has been expressed here. These are some of the other bridges of Calatrava in the US, in Spain, in Italy, and the Netherlands. Some more in Barcelona in Spain, and this is in Manchester in the UK, and so several bridges that he has designed all over the world. But let us come to the building that we will see a little in detail, that is the Quadracci Pavilion, which is a part of the Milwaukee Art Museum in the US by Calatrava in 2001. This is some of the pictures of the Quadracci Pavilion, and it is a part of the Milwaukee Art Museum project. So if you see this aerial shot, this is the Quadracci Pavilion designed by Calatrava. Then there is an earlier building, this one designed by Eero Saarinen in 1957, and then in addition which was designed by David Kahler in 1975. So this museum has been renovated, reinstalled with these galleries, and to the existing museum the Quadracci Pavilion has been added. It is also very similar to, for example, the Hydra Pier by Asymptote in 2002 in the Netherlands. Like the form juts out towards the water body, just as it happens in the Quadracci Pavilion. So I keep on trying to visually compare buildings with one another, or even the volumes with one another, as you have seen in the previous presentations. For example, both the Quadracci Pavilion and the Sydney Opera House fall under sculptural expressionism. We see sails here and we see a bird in flight here. Or for example, how the entire mass has been put together, we can also see that sculptural expression in the National Congress building in Brazil by Oscar Niemeyer. So it is in this part that the Quadracci Pavilion gets connected with the old wing. Calatrava was commissioned to design this edition in 1994 with all these amenities such as a south terrace, a parking garage, a space for expansion which was around 142,000 square feet, and it was a 30% increase in overall gallery expansion. From 90,000 the gallery expanded to 117,000 square feet. So in this building we find now in this building, as in his other buildings, like in the City of Arts and Sciences in Valencia, Spain, he uses cutting edge technology and old world craftsmanship. Calatrava's designs are inspired by nature, featuring a combination of organic forms and technological innovation. That is why he is also called the modern day Gaudi, because Gaudi also was inspired by natural forms and he worked with very fantastic structures in his time. Now if we want to see the museum expansion, here you will find that starting from the movable steel louvers inspired by the wings of a bird, we find the the movable louvers here. These are called as the Burke Bridge Soleil. Then we find the cabled pedestrian bridge with this very soaring mast here that you will see more clearly, this one, and it is also inspired by a sailboat. Then we have this curved single story galleria on one side which reminds of a wave. This elegant network of gardens, hedges, plazas, fountains. The landscape architect is Dan Khile. So here we have the actual gallery from within. It is about 90 feet high. Museum's main entrance leads into this parabolic shaped glass enclosed reception hall, which is 90 feet high ceiling. And the signature elements of Calatrava's design, like I said, is this Ryman bridge, 250 feet long suspended pedestrian bridge linking downtown Milwaukee directly to the lakefront and to the museum. The bridge features this 200-foot angled mast that you see here with cables, and this reminds us from the earlier experiences Calatrava had in bridge design throughout Europe. For example, in this bridge that you see here. So what he learned in his bridge design, he has incorporated that concept in the Kodarachi Pavilion also. These are some of the images of the Kodarachi Pavilion, and you particularly see how the Bridge Soleil works like the wings of a bird. So if you distinctly, we want to see the spaces, we see the Bridge Soleil here, this is the mast, the bridge here, and this is the lower gallery structure in this part. The Burke Bridge Soleil is a movable wing-like sunscreen with 72 steel fins, and it rests on top of this glass enclosed reception hall, part of the Kodarachi Pavilion. It is raised and lowered to control the temperature and light coming within the structure. The fins are ranging in length from 26 to 105 feet. In fact, it is wider than the Boeing 747-400 airplane, and the Bridge Soleil weighs 90 tons, having a wingspan of 217 feet at its widest point. This is how the Bridge Soleil looks when it is completely open, when it is completely closed. Bridge Soleil, we have seen, comes from earlier concepts of Corbusier, who used that in Monastery La Tourette, he used that in the assembly building in Chandigarh, but those were static Bridge Soleil, whereas this one is a dynamic Bridge Soleil. Other similarities, like the Kodarachi Pavilion by Calatrava versus the Guel Park by Antoni Gaudi. The way this entire form has been created, this walkway has been created by Gaudi in the Guel Park, and this part of the Kodarachi Pavilion. That is why Calatrava is referred to as the modern day Gaudi, because of the similarity in their overall architectural approach. Then I was, like I said, I keep on seeing these visual comparisons. For example, the Riola Church and the way the Riola Church, the beams have been designed, the interior view is something similar to the Kodarachi Pavilion. So this kind of similarities or similarities in form between various buildings is a very interesting exercise. Like the gallery here, this reception hall in Kodarachi Pavilion versus the entrance of the Sagrada Familia. Or even more similar is the wing-like form of the Kodarachi Bridge Soleil with that of the TWA terminal, which is in the form of the Golden Eagle, and both of them have this kind of similarity between them. These are some of the pictures of the Kodarachi Pavilion from inside and the night views of the pavilion. Then we come to the Dynamic Earth by Michael Hopkins in 1999. As you know, we have already seen his work called the Schlumberger Research Center, where also he had used a truss with masts, with tension rods holding a Teflon roof. Here also he is working with the tensile structure, but this is also part adaptive reuse. This is partly new built and partly adaptive reuse, a science center and a visitor attraction which is devoted to telling the story of Earth, but the site was formerly a brewery, and part of the brewery's basement and foundations have been retained and incorporated into the new science center. Above that, this tensile fabric roof has been built. So the dynamic earth exhibition, like I told you, that the exhibits have started becoming interactive, visual, with widescreen film technologies. There are simulate events in Earth's evolution from the Big Bang to the future, and visitors experience earthquakes, volcanoes and processes as they negotiate the dynamic earth exhibition. Iconic tensile roof, which is stressed over a steel and cable structure, something that he had already done in the Schlumberger Research Center, is something that Richard Rogers had done in the O2 arena. The roof's profile resembles mountain peaks and glacial forms, and the terrace with two-story exhibition space and entrance forecourt, you see it here. The old brewery building is underneath this terrace, and above this tensile structure has been created. The fabric roof makes for a very generous entrance pavilion, which is enclosed by glazing, but it feels like an outdoor space. So the concept of the blurring of lines between the inside and outside is happening. So here we find the two-storied, the old brewery building. The two-storied exhibition space is a large flexible black box which has been made like that to get an ideal view of the displays inside. Light is restricted there. Office and workshops are on either side of it, and in fact the rear, this old stone wall of the brewery forms, which is edge of the brewery on the site, has been restored and extended to form the external wall of the black box. So this monumental forecourt is here, and the amphitheater is used for outdoor performances. Another point that I told you earlier, that how outdoor spaces are now connected with museums, plazas, forecourts, etc., are a part of the civic space created. The hemispherical dome that you see here is leading to the multimedia theatre below. It really bursts into this space, indicating there is activity going on even below this tensile structure. These are some of the visuals of the dynamic earth. Then, just to have a glimpse of Fano Science Center in Germany by Zaha Hadid, which is a part of deconstructivist architecture, one of Hadid's most significant early large-scale works. And Patrick Schumacher, who took on Zaha Hadid's firm after she passed away and is the architect there, says it is the beginning of a new spatial language. In fact, it was Patrick Schumacher, just to add, who was the one who brought in parametricism in the buildings of Zaha Hadid architects, and early buildings that Zaha Hadid was making fall under the category of deconstructivism. So Haider Aliyev Center, for example, is what falls under parametric architecture. Okay, coming back to this, it's an exposed concrete structure, fragmented angular forms, part of the deconstructivist concept. Building breaks away from traditional geometry, deconstructivism. Expression of instability, again deconstructivism. I'll again remind you of an example. In the Wexner Center, we saw that there was a column hanging in mid-air which was not leading up to the ground. So there is this expression of instability. The building looks almost in motion, something that is repeatedly seen in deconstructivist building. There is a kind of a kinetic thing in these buildings, challenging the conventional notion of order. So these are floating, tilted volumes elevated on these concrete cones that you see here, these concrete cones, and this very dramatic voids and spaces are created beneath. There is this dynamic circulation, interior like a flowing landscape of ramps, voids and non-linear spaces. There is complete spatial flow as if the form is in motion. Again, some of the views of the Fano Science Center. And then we come to the work of Adje Associates. He is actually an architect from Africa who has settled in the UK, and he designed the National Museum of African American History and Culture in 2016 in Washington DC. It is a part of what is called as neo-expressionism, that is expressing the architectural concept of expressionism revived again. It's a sculptural form with this three-tiered crown or corona in which it has been designed like that. It gives the building this very dramatic sculptural inverted presence, emphasizes the symbolic impact of the building over just pure functional aspect of it or pure functionalism. So symbolism is there in both shape and skin. In the form, it looks like a crown, and the bronze lattice work that you see on the outside, this lattice work expresses the African American heritage. It's making a facade into a kind of a narrative element. It is narrating the story of African American heritage. There is the ironwork, there is Yoruba art which is reflecting the African heritage, and it moves from underground with this architectural philosophy that the lower part indicates slavery and segregation of the African Americans, leading upwards to the civil rights, to the culture and their achievement. So as the building comes more into the light signifies hope. Looking at this building, how it has been placed, it is monumental in character, and you find it here next to the Washington Monument, and it's a part of what is called as the National Mall. This entire avenue that you see here, you see this is the Washington Monument leading through this green area to the Capitol building here, and this is where the museum has been placed. And there is a very dynamic play of light and shadow within the building. Again, if you recall, another building where there was this dynamic play of light and shadow was Jean Nouvel's Arab Institute in Paris. Here there is a perforated bronze skin that constantly changes appearance with the daylight, and it's very expressive architecture. Also, the density of pattern of this light is modulated to control the amount of sunlight penetrating into the building. We will just quickly have a look at some of the other buildings like the Centre Pompidou Metz by Shigeru Ban and Richard Rogers, which has got this iconic roof. As you know, the earlier Centre Pompidou in Paris was designed by Richard Rogers. This one is primarily designed by Shigeru Ban with contribution from Rogers, with this vast sweeping timber roof which is like a Chinese hat. It's got a hexagonal lattice work which is combined with this translucent membrane. The form and layout, this central spire that you see here is 77 meters high. It marks the opening year of the Centre Pompidou in Paris, which was 1977. It contains these large gallery tubes. You see them here in the section, these gallery tubes, and you see them here in the building. These are projecting outwards and they frame views of the landmarks of the city of Metz. So you find these tubes all around the museum, these gallery tubes are there. The function and role is it hosts major temporary exhibitions, acts as a cultural beacon and a regeneration project for the city of Metz, something that was true also for the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao. There is symbolism. The roof symbolizes flexibility and openness, blending high-tech engineering of the firm of Arup with traditional timber craft, for which Shigeru Ban is well known. Like Pompidou, this is also a machine for culture, but it is a more warmer, more organic building as compared to the machine-like form of the earlier Centre Pompidou in Paris. It's mostly neutral in palette. Another comparison between the two Pompidou centers, this is mostly neutral in palette with a white tensile roof and with glass, with selective pops of color inside rather than the tremendous use of color in Centre Pompidou. So here you find it in pops here and there in the walls, in the furniture, etc. We come to the end of this presentation through these few examples how these museums and galleries are changing. And if you find opportunity, please go through other examples spread over the past presentations here and there. There are certain examples which highlight the same concepts, and hopefully in my last presentation I'll again look back or again see some of these new buildings in the 21st century. Thank you.